Yo, what's up guys? Ben Babbit here and welcome back to another episode of Road Back to High Stakes. So we're now about a week into February and I just wanted to do a quick recap as to how January has gone, both on and off the tables. Off the tables, it has been such a sick month. Some of the highlights were going to the Aussie Open. Sadly, we paid $350 to watch Djokovic play and retire in the first set. And to add huge insult to injury, we also had a bet on Djokovic to win, which put us firmly in the bin of about 800 or 900 Aussie dollars. I'm saying Aussie dollars as if that makes some kind of savings. So that wasn't great, but it was a very, very fun day nonetheless. Also spent a really long weekend down on the coast. It's just insane at this time of the year. And yeah, I'm just really enjoying things off the tables. And then on the tables, it was a bit of a mixed month, I would say. As you can see, we did play about 38,000 hands, which I think is very, very good volume. So by site breakdown, as you can see on GG, we did lose about 32K. Just cannot get anything going on GG, even in very good games. I just seemingly I haven't had an upswing on GG for so many months, or nearly my entire sample actually. But anyway, we're not here to complain. Coin Poker, on the other hand, wind it in, did have a pretty good month on Coin, winning about 19K, I think, or something like that. So that puts us at a total of minus 12 or 13K for the month. But that doesn't include Rakeback. We had a huge month in Rakeback and we made over 15K there. That's including about 3 or 4 envelopes and then a bunch of Rakeback at the tables and even some leaderboards as well. So that puts the month at around plus 3K, which isn't a bad start, all things considered, but I am feeling very excited and motivated for February. So I'm not going to list off today's hands, but what I will give you is a little precursor. I'm basically hero calling most of the hands today with either ace high or under pairs to the board, and really hoping that we can win. You will have to see how that goes for me in the rest of the video. So first up, we have got pocket threes in the cutoff and we get a tight reg opening for minimum. And as you can see, the big blind, who seems to be a pretty special VIP, is running 83 VPIT. So for those of you who don't know, dark green tag for me is like recreationals on probation. That means I'm not sure if they're like a passive recreational, an aggressive recreational, whether or not they like to donk, whether or not they like to raise a lot, whether or not they like to fold a lot, etc, etc. What I do know is that this may be a little bit biased because 83% VPIT, this could have been over only like 5 or 10 hands. This hand was a few weeks ago, so I can't quite remember now. However, we are just going to always be calling pocket threes here with the assumption that the big blind is going to make plenty of mistakes and we're going to make money in the long run. It is quite helpful to make money in the long run when you flop middle set on 6-3 deuce rainbow though, so I'm pretty pleased about the spot thus far. And we do get a lead out for 75% pot. This isn't very high level strat, but when you are versus a recreational and you have a set, it is a very good idea to raise your hand rather than call. So I do go ahead and do just that. They do call and we see a pretty beautiful 6 of spades. Not only does it give us a full house, but it gives the big blind 3 of a kind a fair amount as well. I think it's fair to say that when they go this sizing on the turn, they have a 6 a lot of the time. The only thing I'm going to say to that is my hand is completely invulnerable, which means I just don't need to protect versus any hands. And then when there's a potential that the recreational can have any sort of bluff, which as we all know can happen and will happen a lot of the time, I decide to call. We now do see effectively the second or first worst card in the deck. A deuce or a 6 would both be horrendous. I actually think a deuce is worse than a 6. In fact, it definitely is. And now they do snap jam in for half pot. I guess my question is, what do you want to do? It is a pretty tough spot, I'm not gonna lie. I am expecting to see a 6 here so much of the time, simply because bet calling the flop and then leading so quickly 3/4 pot on the turn into river donk shove, it just naturally is going to be a 6 more than it's going to be any other hand, I would say. However, this is a recreational who has only played 6 hands, and a general rule of thumb which you should all probably follow is that when you don't have reads on a recreational, you shouldn't be folding hands, especially as strong as this, because there is always a chance that a new recreational is spewing. So with all that in mind, I do make a pretty reluctant call. I'm not happy about this at all, but I thought there was maybe a small chance that they could do this with a deuce, which I think is actually like fairly reasonable. It could happen, so I do flick it in. And on this occasion, the recreational does have ace-10 offsuit, and it would seem that I have massively nit-rolled this spot, but we do take this one down. So next up, we have got pocket kings under the gun, and I go ahead and open it 3x. The reason I'm opening it 3x is because the big blind is a very, very loose recreational, and who was just like calling pretty much any open size. I don't want to make it more than this though. I'm only going to be doing this when there are recreationals in the big blind, and I'm also not going to do it versus all recreationals. Either way, it's not versus this recreational. We are versus the button who 3-bets us. I'm going to make a very mandatory 4-bet with pocket kings, and I'm making it 480 to go. Now, this player on the button is a reg that is definitely capable, definitely not just on the kind of the tight and weak side, which you do get a lot of those kind of players playing on 1K and 2K on GG, but then you also get these other regs. As you can see, there are some orange tags on the table and some red tags as well. Definitely not in that kind of category, but definitely not the player who's just going to like bend over and take it. They're going to fight back as well. We do see A7-4. I'm going to be using a range bet on this board, and on this occasion, I do decide to bet 10% pot. We are definitely going to be facing some raises on this texture, but on this occasion, they do call. And we do see a 5 of diamonds on the turn. Right, so I think our sizing scheme here is going to be quite small bets and checks. And I actually think pocket kings is going to bet a decent amount of the time. On this occasion, I do decide to check my hand though, and villain fires out for 1/3 pot. Now, I think it's really, really important now to figure out how people are going to approach this spot. So after we 4-bet pre and bet 10% on the flop, in position is probably going to be defending like 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks, queens, a bunch of ace-x, some 5-4 suited, some 6-5 suited, some 7-6 suited, maybe even some 8-7 suited if they've arrived, and then probably some flush draws as well, both clubs and diamonds. So when they arrive that wide on the flop, they need to be extraordinarily careful with the amount of the time that they are betting the turn. So I'm talking about combos like 8s, 9s, 10s, and jacks probably are mostly checking this turn, as well as like some combos of like 6-5, some combos of 7-6, some combos of 8-7. What I'm trying to get at here is I think it's very, very hard for in position to regulate their betting frequency and to not get at least some out of line here. Either way, I don't think my combo ever gets to fold the turn regardless of that, so I'm just going to be proceeding with call. We do see a 4 of diamonds on the river and then a shove for, I don't know, about 55% pot or something like that. So I think what I'm just going to say firstly is like talk about theory. I think in theory, this is probably going to be a bluff catcher and it's going to be a mix. And the reason I say that is because holding the king of diamonds is pretty valuable here. We also do unblock clubs, and also we do block some ace king, which in position is definitely going to be in theory calling 4-bets pre versus some of the time. As the ranges get narrower, it becomes much, much easier to overbluff and harder to regulate frequencies. Now I'm saying that because I am certainly guilty for this in plenty of narrow range spots, particularly 4-bet pots, I would say, where I either bluff catch or whether I like kind of bluff or whether I overvalue bet or something like that. My understanding here is that people are going to wrongly identify portions of their range that they should or should not be bluffing. I'm talking about hands like pocket 9s or pocket 10s, for example, that probably mostly check the turn and probably mostly give up the river, but may well always bet the turn and always bet the river. For all those reasons, I decide to just pure call my hand because I do think it's a mix in theory, and I think it probably gets overbluffed in reality. And on this occasion, we're being results oriented as hell, I know, but we do find pocket jacks with a diamond, which is like such a significant overbluff. And maybe they do have exploit reasons to do this, but if we're thinking about this in theory world, like my hand probably plays quite similar to this in theory, and their hand probably doesn't. So yeah, I think this is a very good example of how easy it is to overbluff in 4-bet pots. Right, so next up we have got ace king offsuit in the cutoff. We open it up and we get 3-bet by the big blind. Now white tag basically means I have a note on them. I haven't decided if they're a reg or a recreational yet, but the note on this player that I did have that you can't see is that they were 3-betting a ton with very, very, very bad hands, and they were hyper aggressive, basically triple barreling in the majority of spots. Later on, I did find out this to be completely true, but at the time I made the note, I had like fairly reliable reads that they were definitely getting pretty out of line. You may argue that that means we should just 4-bet our hand always, and to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't argue that massively, but I do think calling when we're this deep is also just a good play, so I decided to do it on this occasion. We see 7 deuce deuce rainbow, so we face 66% on the flop, and I think we probably just mostly want to continue with call, especially with our hand, or maybe we do want to raise a little bit from like pocket 10s and pocket jacks and that kind of thing, but I think for all intents and purposes, I'm going to mostly just play call on this board. I think actually raising could be a much better option versus this type of player who is obviously 3-betting a lot too much and then C-betting a lot as well, so raising actually could just be a very good option. Either way, we do see a queen of clubs, and now we see a very quick 2/3 bet again. I think shoving this turn is a reasonable option if you have very, very good reads that somebody is very aggressive. For what it's worth, I think this is just going to be a call in theory. We do a very good job of blocking all the queen X, and we also have like pretty high EV, high equity in this spot, given that we block aces and kings as well, and then have 6 very, very clean outs versus a hand that we may well already be losing to. We see a deuce of hearts on the river, and now villain doesn't waste much time and shoves it in for about like 35-40% pot or something like that. So what do you guys want to do here with the reads that I have on this player? Very aggressive, has seemed to be pretty barrel happy, has seemed to be pretty bluffy, has shown up with some pretty marginal hands pre-flop and then on the river. Basically, my thinking is I would rather call this hand than a bunch of my other pocket pairs. Whether or not out of position shoves jacks or tens, my sense is that they probably will shove pocket jacks, but I think that's going to happen in theory anyway, so I'm not too worried about that. If they do start shoving hands like pocket tens, pocket nines, pocket eights, then we have a pretty huge problem on our hands, but I just didn't think that was happening. We also do, again, block the queen X region, we also block aces, we also block kings, and we also do block ace deuce suited, which I think is fairly important versus this type of player. And then, not to mention that even if they are finding a lot of those value bets, their composition of their range, and composition means basically kind of like their value to bluffs, or just like their overall range and how often they're allowed to bluff, they probably just do have too many hands like offsuit combos like, I don't know, king jack offsuit, or like a 10-9 suited or something like that, that probably just never gets to bluff this river. Therefore, their range is just going to compose of like way too many bluffs, making more excuses about making hero calls. But with all that considered, I don't waste much time and call with ace king. And we do run into the old 9-4 of diamonds, which has gone very well for us. And I'll chuck somewhere up on the screen, I haven't looked at the sim, whether or not my hand should have called the turn, whether or not I should have called the river in theory, and then you can make your judgments based on that one. So that's going to do it for today's video. Please let me know what you thought about those hands. There were some very contentious ones, and I'd be super curious to hear what you thought about the way that I played them. Next week, we have got a very special episode. We have managed to get Luke Johnson, or Clanty, on the channel reviewing one of my live plays. So I'm really looking forward to putting that one out for you guys next week. But until next time, take care, and I will see you at the tables.